My name is John Mantovani. I'm a child neurologist from St. Louis. Medical director of a children's hospital and child development center, and practitioner that works a lot with kids and families that have autism spectrum disorder, among other developmental disabilities. I think most of you have heard me here before speak, so I don't need to go over issues unless there are specific concerns. There would be a couple of points from the medical perspective that might bear emphasis. One is this recognized concern that Dr. Roop addressed.
He's not a doctor. I tell you what, senators have enough trouble fitting through those doors. If you start calling them doctors too, they'll never make it.
Yeah, I didn't mean to demote you. Senator Roop talked about in his opening remarks, which is the frightening numbers that show more and more individuals that are being diagnosed with this condition. And I think that's alarming to all of us that work in the field, as well as people in general. And the explanation for that is not clear. Certainly there's earlier diagnosis. Certainly there's been a broadening of some of the diagnostic criteria. But there may well be a core increase for reasons that are yet poorly understood. I think the point to make about that is that the St. Louis metro area now has the highest prevalence of autism spectrum disorders of any community in the country. Some of that, I would say, is because we find it, but we're very concerned what that actually means. So we now have a prevalence based on the statistics just published by the Centers for Disease Control. These were not published locally. They collect from 10 sites around the country. And the number in St. Louis is 12.1 per thousand. Last time I sat here, the number I gave you was 7.3 per thousand. There's been an increase now of about 2/3 in terms of prevalence. It now means that 1 in 83 children in the St. Louis metro area born in, let's see, these were 2007 data, so they were born in 1999, that have been tracked by this very exacting system. 1 in 83 have been diagnosed by a practitioner or a center as having an autism spectrum disorder. Some of it alludes to what Mrs. Unum said earlier, which is that the milder forms of autism, the PDD not otherwise specified, etc., are being diagnosed now much more readily, much earlier. Those are absolutely the ones that respond the best. Unfortunately, it's like everything else. The less severe the situation, the earlier your stage of cancer, the milder your heart disease, the better interventions work. Well, that's also true of the autism spectrum. It's not to say that at the more severe end that there's not tremendous benefits, and sometimes those families are the most grateful for the benefits that they receive. But the potential for a mainstream educational process for a child with autism spectrum disorder is about 50% of them, if we start early enough, ought to be mainstreamed by elementary school age. And that's where all of the early focus on screening, early diagnosis, etc., has been. So the prevalence numbers are very scary. It's not for this group necessarily to understand exactly why, because none of us really do. I heard some comments that I thought were really disturbing earlier, and I want to deal with them directly. From one of the spokespeople for the insurance industry, who made the point that these numbers are all over the map, we don't know what they mean, we need to step back and think about this. Yeah, we do. We need to step back and think about how we make a difference in the lives of these kids who are diagnosed. If Anthem has a better way of collecting epidemiological data than the Centers for Disease Control and National Institutes of Health, we would love to hear it. Until then, their problem is helping their clients, as far as I'm concerned. So the other issue has to do with how this stuff works. Why would you do a behavioral therapy for a kid with a neurological disorder? The reason it works is because their brains are changing and they respond to the environmental inputs from the therapist and the behavioral specialists. It changes the structure of their brain. We can see it on functional MRI scans. We can see it on PET scans. We can see it in the children's behavior. This stuff works on a neurological basis. It's not voodoo, it's not education, it's neurological improvement. With that, I'm going to stop.
Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony here today, sir.